Okay, I'm in my kitchen. I do not have my Snuggie, and I don't have a lot of time, but I want to make a video in defense of Andrew Jackson, mainly because there's this post going around, or there was a post that I saw on my Dash, which was, someone responded to a picture labeling Andrew Jackson as a genocidal racist, and the original poster was talking about how, there's a genocidal racist on our $20 bill, and then someone else, responded to that, and they were like, I agree to a certain extent, because, context is important. There were it wasn't like Andrew Jackson was the only racist, and then other people responded to that, and they just completely shut down that person, and they were like, well, you can't be morally relativistic, and that doesn't justify anything, and whatever. So I just want to respond to that, and I agree with that, the person who responded, who was talking about context, and before I start, I will give a disclaimer, which is that I guess maybe a year ago, I saw a musical called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, which was a musical about Andrew Jackson, and his rise to the presidency, and then his time as president, and I guess I agree with that, that person who replied, because I think that in all controversial situations, context is important, and that context shouldn't be used to justify anything. Like, the Trail of Tears was awful, and it was immoral. So was slavery. So is slavery, because slavery unfortunately still happens today. So was the Japanese-American internment. All of these things are horrible, and they shouldn't exist. They really shouldn't. But at the same time, frequently what happens is that people use, people's stances on these kinds of issues, and they just use them to demonize entire people. And that does a complete disservice to the complexity of human beings, because, look, if I were born 200 years ago as the daughter of a southern plantation owner, I have no way of knowing right now what my stance on slavery would be. And that wouldn't justify anything. I mean, if I was racist, that wouldn't mean that being racist was okay. But my entire livelihood would have been built on the backs of slaves. My entire life would be completely impossible without the existence of slaves, and I would have been brought up in a culture where slavery was completely and entirely acceptable. And so I can't look back and point my finger at people and say, oh, how dare you? Because I don't know how I would have lived my life in that situation. And this is not to justify anything, and it's not to say that, oh, slavery is completely moral in certain contexts, and, oh, the Trail of Tears was completely okay. But I think there's something to be said about the fact that, like, Andrew Jackson in particular did what he thought was right. At least that's my interpretation. I don't think he did it for selfish motivations. I mean, he was racist. That is entirely true. But I think that he did the Trail of Tears because he thought that he needed to. He thought that it was necessary, and he thought that it was what was right. And that kind of motivation is more than I can say of a few people today. Like, I think that today there are a lot of people who are motivated, at least in some decisions, more by greed and selfishness, and not necessarily by what they think is right. But I think Andrew Jackson, in this situation of the Trail of Tears, did what he thought was right. And again, this is not justifying anything, but all I'm saying is that context is important. Context is really important, because we can't turn people into two-dimensional things. Like, Andrew Jackson, he didn't just do the Trail of Tears as president. He did more than that. And all people remember is the Trail of Tears, but he did a lot of other things too. I mean, he did this whole thing with the banks that I don't have time to go into, but, research him. He's not completely awful. He did some awful things, yeah. But did he do them because he was evil, or did he do them because he was trying to do what was right? So, yeah, context is important, okay? Bye!